Tessa Majors. On December 11, 2019, 18-year-old Tessa Majors, a freshman at Barnard College, walked through Morningside Park near Columbia University. The Virginia native had moved to New York to pursue journalism and music, playing bass in a band called Patient Zero. She navigated the city with the confidence of someone embracing urban life. That Wednesday evening around 7 p.m, she chose a route through the park she had walked before. 3 teenagers also entered the park that night with different intentions. Rashawn Weaver, 14 years old, Luciano Lewis, 14, and a 13-year-old accomplice had planned to rob someone in the park. They targeted Tessa for her phone and money, approaching her on a staircase. When Tessa resisted their demands, the encounter turned fatal. Weaver stabbed her multiple times in the chest. During the struggle, Tessa bit one of the attacker's fingers, leaving crucial evidence. Tessa screamed for help and managed to climb the stairs toward the street before collapsing. Witnesses heard her cries and called emergency services. She was rushed to Mount Sinai St. Luke's Hospital, where she died shortly after arrival. The random nature of the attack shocked the Columbia community and raised immediate questions about park safety in Manhattan. How did investigators identify 3 teenagers in a city of millions? Surveillance cameras captured images of individuals matching the suspect's clothing near the park around the time of the attack. The 13-year-old was identified and arrested the next day. During questioning, he provided information about his accomplices. Forensic examination of evidence from the scene revealed DNA under Tessa's fingernails and bite mark evidence that linked Weaver and Lewis to the attack, while DNA was found under Tessa's fingernails that linked to Rashawn Weaver. The bite mark evidence was located on Weaver's finger, inflicted by Tessa during the struggle, rather than being evidence found at the scene that linked both to the attack. Luciano Lewis was primarily linked through the 13-year-old's testimony and video surveillance. The investigation team worked around the clock, processing hundreds of tips from the community. Detectives reviewed extensive surveillance footage from cameras throughout the area, tracking the suspect's movements before and after the attack. Phone records placed them near the park at the critical time. The digital and physical evidence wove together to create an overwhelming case against all 3 participants. The investigation revealed the attack was purely opportunistic. The 3 teenagers had no prior connection to Tessa. They had entered the park looking for someone to rob, and she happened to be in their path. The senselessness of the motive made the tragedy even harder for her family and the community to process. Weaver and Lewis were indicted and faced trial proceedings between 2020 and 2022. All 3 defendants ultimately entered guilty pleas. The 13-year-old received 18 months in juvenile detention. Lewis was sentenced to 9 years to life in prison. Weaver received 14 years to life. During his sentencing, Weaver addressed the court, calling his actions selfish. Tessa's family delivered impact statements expressing their devastation and noting what they perceived as insufficient remorse from those responsible. Her father spoke about the daughter they would never see graduate, pursue her journalism career, or start a family. The case sparked intense discussions about youth involvement in serious crimes and sentencing for juvenile offenders. Some argued the penalties were too harsh given their ages, while others felt the sentences reflected the gravity of taking a life during a robbery. In 2025, Weaver was involved in another incident at Rikers Island. Demonstrating ongoing behavioral issues while incarcerated, Barnard College and Columbia University increased security measures in and around Morningside Park following Tessa's case. The institutions enhanced lighting, expanded security patrols, and encouraged students to use buddy systems when walking through less populated areas. Tessa's memory lives on through her music and the journalism she began developing during her brief time at college. While Tessa's case represented random street crime, decades earlier, New York faced a different kind of terror from someone who struck repeatedly. Son of Sam. Between July 1976 and July 1977, New York City lived in fear of a shooter targeting young people, often couples in parked cars. The killer used a .44 caliber revolver and struck seemingly at random across multiple boroughs. 6 people died and 7 others sustained injuries during the spree. The shooter would become known as Son of Sam, a name he chose in letters sent to police and newspapers. Who was terrorizing the city, and what drove this rampage? The first attack occurred on July 29, 1976, when Donna Lauria and Jody Valenti sat in a car in the Bronx. A man approached and fired multiple shots through the windshield. Lauria died instantly, while Valenti survived her injuries. Over the following year, similar attacks occurred across Queens, Brooklyn, and the Bronx. Victims included college students, young professionals, and teenagers. The randomness created paralyzing fear across the city. The killer sent taunting letters to police and journalist Jimmy Breslin. One letter concluded, "I'll be back. Yours in murder, Mr. Monster," signed Son of Sam. The communications revealed someone who craved attention and enjoyed the terror he created. Police formed a massive task force, but struggled to identify a suspect despite numerous witness descriptions and ballistics analysis. The breakthrough came through an unexpected detail. On July 31, 1977, the final shooting occurred near a park in Brooklyn where Stacy Moskowitz and Robert Violante sat in a car. Moskowitz died from her injuries, while Violante survived but lost sight in one eye. A woman who had been walking her dog that night recalled seeing a man remove a parking ticket from a car near the scene. She reported this detail to police, who traced the ticket to a vehicle registered to David Berkowitz in Yonkers. This simple parking violation became the thread that unraveled the entire case. Detectives drove to the address associated with the vehicle registration, prepared for what might be another dead end in a frustrating investigation. Instead, they found Berkowitz's car parked on the street. Looking through the window, officers spotted a Commando Mark III .45 caliber semi-automatic rifle and a manila envelope addressed to Sergeant Dowd of the Omega Precinct. The evidence visible in plain view provided probable cause for a more thorough investigation. Officers went to Berkowitz's address on August 10, 1977, and found the .44 caliber revolver in his car. When approached, Berkowitz allegedly said, "Well, you got me," before confessing to all the shootings. His arrest brought relief to a city that had been paralyzed by fear for over a year. But what motivated these attacks? David Berkowitz, born Richard David Falco in 1953, was adopted and grew up in the Bronx. He experienced bullying during his youth and demonstrated pyromania tendencies. As an adult, he worked as a postal employee and lived alone in Yonkers. Initially, Berkowitz claimed that demons commanded him to kill, speaking through a neighbor's dog. This bizarre explanation dominated early media coverage. Years later, Berkowitz recanted the demon story, admitting it was a hoax. Still, he primarily attributed his motives to intense social isolation and a general hatred of the world, specifically targeting young couples because they represented a life he felt he could never have. He stated that misogyny and revenge fantasies actually drove his actions. He harbored anger toward women and felt rejected socially. The shootings gave him power and attention he craved. Some researchers have explored claims that Berkowitz was involved with a satanic cult and that others participated in some attacks, though these theories remain unproven and controversial. In May 1978, Berkowitz pleaded guilty to all charges, received 6 consecutive life sentences. He has remained incarcerated ever since. His parole applications have been consistently denied, most recently in 2024. He currently resides at Schauengunk Correctional Facility. Over decades of imprisonment, Berkowitz has expressed remorse and claimed religious conversion. He has participated in interviews and documentaries examining his crimes. The Son of Sam case influenced numerous changes in how police coordinate multi-jurisdictional investigations and how media covers active manhunts. It also inspired New York's Son of Sam law, which prevents criminals from profiting from their crimes through media deals. From the 1970s to modern times, where gang dynamics would lead to another senseless tragedy. Lisandro Guzman Feliz. On June 20, 2018, 15-year-old Lisandro Guzman Feliz, known as Junior, was chased into a Bronx bodega by gang members wielding weapons. The teenager desperately sought help from store workers, but attackers dragged him back outside. What happened next was captured on surveillance cameras and would spark citywide outrage. Why was this young man targeted? And what did the footage reveal? Junior was a member of the NYPD Explorers program, a youth initiative for those interested in law enforcement careers. He had ambitions of becoming a detective. That evening, he was near his home in the Belmont section of the Bronx when members of the Trinitarios gang spotted him. 14 gang members chased Junior for several blocks. He ran to a bodega, hoping the store would offer safety. Security footage showed Junior pleading for help from store employees before gang members pulled him back to the street. Outside, the group attacked him with machetes and knives. Jonaiki Martinez Estrella delivered a fatal stab wound to Junior's neck. Despite his catastrophic injury, Junior managed to run toward a hospital several blocks away, collapsing outside St. Barnabas Hospital. He died shortly after arrival. The surveillance video quickly circulated on social media, generating massive public reaction. The hashtag #JusticeForJunior trended nationally as people expressed horror at the viciousness of the attack and Junior's futile attempts to find safety. The footage showed not just the attack, but also the store employees' failure to intervene or call police during the initial confrontation. Medical examiners determined that Junior might have survived if he had received immediate emergency care, adding another layer of tragedy to the case. His desperate run to the hospital, bleeding profusely, was captured on additional security cameras along his path. But why did the gang target Junior? Investigation revealed a case of mistaken identity. The Trinitarios believed Junior was affiliated with a rival gang called Sunset. This false belief may have stemmed from a video circulating online that they misinterpreted. Junior had no gang affiliation whatsoever. His involvement with NYPD Explorers represented the opposite path from gang life. The attackers killed an innocent teenager based on completely inaccurate assumptions. The widespread distribution of surveillance footage helped police identify suspects rapidly. Community members provided tips, and within days, arrests began. Ultimately, all 14 participants faced charges. The trials in 2019 resulted in convictions. Martinez Estrella and other key participants received sentences of 25 years to life, though some convictions were later modified on appeal. As of January 2026, Jonaiki Martinez Estrella remains alive and is serving his sentence of 25 years to life at a high-security New York State correctional facility. The case exposed gang recruitment practices targeting youth in economically disadvantaged neighborhoods. It prompted discussions about intervention programs and community resources to provide alternatives to gang involvement. Junior's death became a rallying point for anti-gang violence initiatives in the Bronx and throughout New York City. The next case would shift from street violence to the dark side of online relationships. Bianca Devins. In July 2019, 17-year-old Bianca Devins attended a concert in New York City with Brandon Clark, a 21-year-old man she had met through online communities. Bianca was active on social media platforms, where she had cultivated a following and found friendships. That night at the concert, she kissed another person, an action that would trigger a deadly response from Clark. What happened after the concert would expose the dangers of online obsession. After the concert ended, Clark drove Bianca in his car. The nature of their relationship was complex. Clark believed they were romantically involved, while Bianca considered him a friend. His possessiveness had become increasingly apparent, but the extent of his obsession would only become clear through his final actions. Clark pulled over in Utica, New York, and attacked Bianca with a knife, inflicting wounds that nearly decapitated her. After taking her life, Clark did something that distinguished this case from typical homicides. He photographed her body and posted the images to Discord, a messaging platform popular with gaming communities, along with captions including "Sorry fuckers." He then attempted to take his own life. Emergency services received calls from Discord users who had seen the images and recognized the severity of the situation. Police located Clark's vehicle and found him with self-inflicted injuries. He survived and was taken into custody. Officers discovered Bianca's body at the scene. The immediate circulation of graphic images created what Bianca's family would later describe as ongoing trauma. Despite efforts to have platforms remove the photos, they continued appearing on various sites, re-traumatizing the family each time someone reposted them. Bianca's mother and others characterized this phenomenon as psychological terrorism, a form of continued harm extending beyond the initial crime. The family had to repeatedly contact platforms, submit takedown requests, and endure seeing their daughter's final moments commodified by strangers seeking shock value or attempting to harass them. Some users created accounts specifically to send the images to family members, turning the internet into a weapon of continued cruelty. Why did Clark commit this act? Investigation and his own statements revealed obsessive jealousy. Clark couldn't accept that Bianca had independence and connections with others. When she kissed someone at the concert, he viewed it as betrayal, despite having no legitimate claim to control her behavior. His decision to share images suggested a desire to punish her publicly, even after taking her life, demonstrating extreme narcissism and inability to accept her autonomy. Clark pleaded guilty to the charges and received a sentence of 25 years to life in prison. During proceedings, details emerged about his troubled background, including witnessing domestic altercations. However, these circumstances did not excuse his calculated actions. Bianca's case prompted legislative action. Her family advocated for laws requiring social media platforms to remove violent imagery more rapidly. Bianca's law was proposed in New York to establish protocols for content moderation when images depict homicide victims. The case highlighted broader issues about online relationships, parasocial connections where one person develops intense feelings without reciprocation, and platform responsibilities regarding harmful content. From online obsession to a predator who operated in the shadows for decades. Gilgo Beach serial killer. In December 2010, a police officer searching for missing woman Shannon Gilbert discovered human remains along Ocean Parkway near Gilgo Beach on Long Island. What began as one search would uncover a burial ground containing multiple victims. Over subsequent months, investigators found 10 sets of remains along the remote stretch of shoreline. who had been disposing of bodies in this location. And how long had they operated undetected? The victims were primarily women who had worked as escorts and advertised services online. They included Megan Waterman, Amber Costello, Melissa Barthélemy, and Maureen Brainerd Barnes. Many bodies were found wrapped in burlap and positioned in specific ways, suggesting the same perpetrator. The dates of disappearances ranged from 1993 through 2011, indicating someone had been active for nearly 2 decades. Despite extensive investigation, the case went cold for years. The remote location and transient nature of the victims' lifestyles made investigation challenging. Many victims hadn't been reported missing immediately, delaying the discovery of patterns. The case seemed destined to join the ranks of unsolved serial homicides. Then in 2023, a breakthrough occurred. Investigators arrested Rex Heuermann, a 40-something architect from Massapequa Park. How did police connect him to victims from decades past? Forensic technology had advanced significantly since the original discoveries. Investigators re-examined evidence using modern DNA analysis techniques. Hair samples found on victims were subjected to mitochondrial DNA testing, which can trace maternal lineage. The mitochondrial DNA testing linked one hair to Heuermann's wife, found on the burlap of Megan Waterman, and one hair found on Amber Costello to Heuermann himself, which was matched using DNA from a discarded pizza crust. The forensic breakthrough demonstrated how touch DNA and familial matching could solve cold cases that seemed impossible to crack using older methods. Additionally, investigators examined historical cell phone data and online activity. They discovered searches related to sadistic content and methods for disposing of remains. The digital trail, combined with DNA evidence, provided enough probable cause for arrest. Detectives also traced his movements using historical cell tower data, showing his phone pinging towers near disposal sites around times victims disappeared. The combination of physical and digital forensics created a comprehensive picture of his activities over decades. Heuermann was charged with multiple counts related to at least 7 victims. His motive appears related to targeting vulnerable women whose disappearances might not trigger immediate investigation. The selection of escorts and the isolated disposal site suggested calculated planning rather than impulsive acts. In 2025, the court actually moved towards severing some of the charges due to the discovery of additional victims, specifically the Manorville remains, leading to multiple legal tracks rather than one single trial for all victims. The case raised questions about how a seemingly ordinary professional could maintain a double life for decades. Heuermann lived with his family in a suburban neighborhood, worked as an architect in Manhattan, and apparently escaped suspicion until forensic technology caught up with his crimes. Neighbors expressed shock at his arrest, describing him as unremarkable and quiet. The Gilgo Beach investigation also highlighted vulnerabilities in systems designed to protect people engaged in sex work. Advocates pointed to the case as evidence that crimes against marginalized individuals often receive less investigative priority. The eventual identification of Heuermann came only through technological advances and renewed commitment to cold cases, while the Gilgo Beach case involved calculated selection of vulnerable victims. The next tragedy would strike a woman who simply went for a run. Karina Vetrano. On August 2, 2016, 30-year-old Karina Vetrano went jogging in Spring Creek Park in Queens, a route she frequently took. Her father typically ran with her, but that evening he was unavailable. Karina decided to run alone, texting her father that she loved him before heading out. When she didn't return home, her parents grew alarmed. What had happened during what should have been a routine evening run? Karina's father went searching for her and discovered her body in a marshy area of the park. She had been attacked, assaulted, and strangled. Forensic examination revealed she had fought fiercely against her attacker, sustaining injuries, including cracked teeth from biting during the struggle. DNA evidence was recovered from under her fingernails, providing crucial forensic material for investigators. The random nature of the attack terrorized the Queens community. Karina had no enemies and no known conflicts. She was simply exercising in a public park. The possibility that someone was lurking in the park waiting for a victim created widespread fear about public space safety. For months, the investigation yielded no suspects despite the DNA evidence. Police conducted extensive searches and interviewed numerous individuals, but none matched the genetic profile. The case seemed destined to go cold until investigators took an unconventional approach. Police canvassed the neighborhood requesting voluntary DNA samples from men who lived near the park. This controversial tactic raised privacy concerns, but ultimately led to a breakthrough. Chanel Lewis, a 20-year-old man from Brooklyn, provided a sample that matched DNA from the crime scene. Lewis was arrested in February 2017, 6 months after Karina's death. During questioning, he confessed to attacking her, claiming he was angry that day, and Karina happened to be in his path. The senselessness of the motive compounded the tragedy. She died because she crossed paths with someone experiencing rage who decided to act on violent impulses. Lewis's first trial in 2018 ended in a hung jury, with some jurors questioning the interrogation tactics used to obtain his confession. The retrial in 2019 resulted in conviction, and Lewis received life imprisonment without possibility of parole. Background investigation revealed Lewis had experienced mental health issues and social isolation. He lived with his mother and had difficulty maintaining employment. However, he had no history of similar attacks. The randomness of selecting Karina as a victim suggested someone acting on impulse rather than following an established pattern. Psychiatric evaluations found him competent despite documented challenges. Karina's case led to increased security measures in Spring Creek Park, including enhanced lighting and more frequent patrols. Her family became advocates for park safety and support for families of violence victims. The community held vigils and races in her memory, celebrating her life while mourning the circumstances of her death. Local running clubs established safety protocols, including group runs and check-in systems for solo runners. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. Not all predators operate in the shadows. Some hide behind ordinary facades in plain sight. Libby Kletz. On July 11, 2011, an 8-year-old boy named Libby Kletsky left his day camp in Borough Park, Brooklyn, intending to walk home alone for the first time. His parents had allowed this milestone as practice in independence, mapping out a specific route. The tight-knit Orthodox Jewish community seemed safe, with familiar faces on every corner. Libby knew he could ask for help if needed. But when he became disoriented and asked the wrong person for directions, a routine walk home would become every parent's worst nightmare. How could such a brief moment of confusion lead to such horror? Libby missed a turn and became lost in the neighborhood streets. Growing anxious, he approached a man and asked for help. That man was Levi Aaron, 35 years old, who lived alone in an apartment nearby. Aaron offered to help Libby and invited him to wait while he figured out where the boy needed to go. Instead of immediately contacting Libby's family or walking him home, Aaron kept the boy in his apartment. When Libby failed to arrive home, his parents immediately contacted authorities. The close community mobilized within hours, organizing search parties that scoured the neighborhood throughout the night. Volunteers distributed flyers, checked security footage, and interviewed anyone who might have seen the boy. The rapid response demonstrated the community's solidarity, but time was already slipping away. Surveillance cameras from local businesses captured images of Libby walking with a man, later identified as Aaron. Police traced Aaron's identity through license plate recognition and went to his residence. When officers arrived on July 13th, they discovered evidence that Libby had been there. Further investigation revealed the boy's remains had been dismembered, with parts found in Aaron's freezer and others disposed of in a dumpster. Why would someone harm a lost child who asked for help? Aaron's background provided some context, but no satisfying explanation. He had suffered a head injury years earlier and displayed social difficulties throughout his life. He lived a solitary existence and worked various jobs, including maintaining a hardware store. Neighbors described him as odd, but not threatening. During police interviews, Aaron claimed he panicked when he realized the massive search underway for the boy. Rather than return Libby safely, which would have been simple, Aaron made a catastrophic decision. Forensic examination suggested Aaron had given Libby a combination of medications, possibly to keep him subdued. The autopsy revealed these substances in the boy's system. The dismemberment appeared to be an attempt to conceal evidence after the fact. Aaron's apartment contained cleaning supplies and other materials consistent with trying to eliminate traces of what had occurred. Aaron was charged and faced trial, ultimately pleading guilty in 2012 to avoid the death penalty. He received a sentence of 40 years to life in prison. Psychiatric evaluations noted his history of mental health issues, though he was deemed competent to stand trial. Aaron reported experiencing hallucinations and claimed voices told him to act, though the validity of these claims remained disputed. The Borough Park community was devastated by Libby's case. Parents who had been teaching their children independence suddenly reconsidered allowing them to walk alone. The case prompted discussions about stranger danger in communities that had felt insulated from such threats. As of January 2026, Levi Aaron is serving his 40-year-to-life sentence at Sullivan Correctional Facility, from a chance encounter in Brooklyn to a mother's calculated actions in suburban New York. Garnet Spears. In January 2014, 5-year-old Garnet Spears was admitted to Nyack Hospital in New York with unusual symptoms, including seizures and high sodium levels. The boy had a documented history of medical issues throughout his short life, requiring frequent hospitalizations and treatments. His mother, Lacey Spears, appeared devoted to his care, maintaining detailed blogs and social media posts about his conditions. Medical staff at the hospital grew concerned about inconsistencies in Garnet's case. What they would discover would reveal a deeply disturbing pattern. Could a mother really be causing her own child's illnesses? Garnet had been hospitalized numerous times since birth, presenting with various ailments that required medical intervention. Lacey maintained an active online presence documenting her son's struggles, garnering sympathy and support from followers. She portrayed herself as a devoted single mother fighting tirelessly to help her sick child. Medical records showed a pattern of unexplained symptoms that would arise, be treated, and then recur. During his stay at Nyack Hospital, medical personnel noticed that Garnet's sodium levels would spike dangerously high without clear medical explanation. Hospital staff began monitoring the situation more closely. Surveillance cameras in the hospital captured Lacey entering Garnet's room with feeding bags and appearing to add something to his feeding tube. The footage provided crucial evidence of what investigators suspected. Garnet's sodium levels reached fatal concentrations, causing brain swelling and ultimately leading to his death on January 23, 2014. Medical examiners ruled the death a homicide, determining that salt had been intentionally administered in quantities that no child could consume accidentally. The investigation shifted from medical mystery to criminal case. Investigators reviewed Garnett's extensive medical history. They discovered that many of his previous illnesses had no clear organic cause. Doctors who had treated him over the years, when interviewed retrospectively, noted inconsistencies in how his symptoms presented versus what tests revealed. The pattern suggested someone was causing illnesses rather than Garnett suffering from legitimate conditions. Lacey Spears' background revealed important context. She appeared to have Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a psychological disorder where a caregiver fabricates or induces illness in someone under their care to gain attention. Her extensive social media presence documented every hospital visit, every test, every treatment. She received sympathy, support, and attention from online communities. The more serious Garnett's conditions appeared, the more engagement her posts received. Lacey was arrested and charged with second-degree murder and first-degree manslaughter. During her trial in 2015, prosecutors presented the surveillance footage, medical testimony about the impossibility of accidental salt ingestion at those levels, and evidence from her social media posts. Experts testified about Munchausen by proxy and how the disorder manifested in Lacey's behavior patterns. Defense attorneys attempted to argue that Garnett had legitimate medical issues and that Lacey was a devoted mother unfairly accused. However, the video evidence combined with expert medical testimony proved overwhelming. In April 2015, Lacey Spears was convicted and sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. The judge emphasized the breach of trust involved when a parent harms their own child. Lacey Spears is serving her sentence at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility. While she was initially sentenced to 20 years to life, her sentence was later reviewed. But her earliest parole eligibility remains May 2034. While that case involved deliberate harm disguised as care, the next would spark fierce debate about protection versus overreach. Jordan Neely. On May 1, 2023, Jordan Neely, a 30-year-old man, was traveling on an F train in Manhattan when he began exhibiting distressed behavior. Neely was unhoused and struggling with mental health issues, a visible presence in the subway system where he occasionally performed Michael Jackson impersonations. On this particular afternoon, witnesses reported he was shouting about being hungry, thirsty, and not caring whether he lived or died. Former Marine Daniel Penny, 24 years old, approached Neely from behind and placed him in a restraining hold. What happened next would divide public opinion and raise fundamental questions about mental health, public safety, and the limits of citizen intervention. Video recorded by other passengers showed Penny holding Neely in what appeared to be a chokehold for several minutes while the train was stopped at a station. Other passengers assisted in restraining Neely's arms. Neely eventually lost consciousness and later died from what the medical examiner determined was compression of the neck. Penny released him once he stopped moving, but by then Neely was unresponsive. Emergency responders arrived and attempted revival, but were unsuccessful. The incident immediately sparked intense public debate. Some viewed Penny's actions as necessary protection of other passengers from someone behaving erratically. Others saw it as excessive force against a mentally ill person who posed no actual physical threat. The fact that Neely was black and Penny was white added racial dimensions to the controversy, with some characterizing it as another example of violence against black individuals in distress. Who was Jordan Neely, and how did he end up in this situation? Jordan Neely had once been a well-known street performer, particularly famous for his Michael Jackson impersonations in Times Square and subway stations. He had been featured in documentaries about subway performers and was recognized by many regular commuters. However, his life had been marked by trauma. His mother was murdered when he was a teenager, an event that profoundly affected his mental health. Over subsequent years, he experienced housing instability and struggled with psychiatric conditions that went largely untreated. By 2023, Neely had accumulated numerous arrests, primarily for minor offenses related to his mental health struggles and homelessness. He cycled through the criminal justice and mental health systems without receiving sustained treatment. Advocates pointed to his case as emblematic of systemic failures in addressing mental health and housing crises. Daniel Penny's background contrasted sharply. Born around 1999 and raised in Suffolk County, Penny had served as a Marine sergeant from 2017 to 2021. He received training in restraint techniques during his military service. At the time of the incident, he was studying architecture. In interviews after the event, Penny stated he felt Neely was extraordinarily strong and believed he was protecting other passengers from potential harm. The legal proceedings became a flashpoint for competing narratives about vigilantism, self-defense, and mental health. Penny was charged with second-degree manslaughter and criminally negligent homicide. Prosecutors argued he used excessive force and continued restraining Neely well beyond when any reasonable threat had passed. The medical examiner ruled the death a homicide caused by compression of the neck. Defense attorneys challenged this conclusion, presenting their own medical experts who suggested other factors contributed to Neely's death, including drug use and sickle cell trait. They portrayed Penny as a good Samaritan who intervened to protect vulnerable passengers from someone behaving unpredictably. The defense emphasized Penny's military training in restraint techniques and argued he acted reasonably given the circumstances. In December 2024, the trial of Daniel Penny resulted in a mistrial on the charge of second-degree manslaughter after the jury deadlocked. However, he was acquitted of criminally negligent homicide. Prosecutors have since indicated they may seek a retrial on the remaining count in 2025-2026. From a subway confrontation to a calculated scheme involving dismemberment and deception. Brandy Odom. In June 2018, Brandy Odom, 26 years old, was reported missing from her Queens apartment. The woman had connections to the sex work industry and was known to associates of Corey Martin, a man who operated as an exploiter in that world. When police investigated her disappearance, they initially had few leads. Then in 2020, human remains began appearing in Canarsie Park in Brooklyn. The discovery would reveal not just a homicide, but a methodically planned scheme involving insurance fraud and techniques borrowed from television crime dramas. What drove someone to such calculated violence? Corey Martin, born around 1988, had a relationship with Brandy that was exploitative in nature. He exerted control over her involvement in sex work. At some point, Martin purchased life insurance policies on Brandy worth approximately $200,000, naming himself as beneficiary. This financial motive would drive his subsequent actions. In June 2018, Martin strangled Brandy in a Queens residence. After taking her life, he dismembered her body. What made this case particularly disturbing was the planning evident in his actions. Martin had researched methods for dismemberment and disposal by watching television shows like Dexter, which featured a serial killer who carefully cleaned crime scenes. He also studied The First 48, a reality show about homicide investigations, apparently trying to learn how to avoid detection. Martin disposed of Brandy's remains in multiple locations, primarily in Canarsie Park. The discovery of body parts in 2020 prompted a major investigation. Forensic examination identified the remains as Brandy's through various methods, including fingerprint and dental records. Investigators began looking into her background and associates, eventually focusing on Martin. The insurance policies provided a clear motive. Martin had filed claim, seeking to collect on Brandy's death, claiming she had died of natural causes. Insurance investigators grew suspicious of the circumstances and the beneficiary arrangement. They contacted law enforcement with their concerns, providing crucial information that directed the criminal investigation. Martin was arrested along with his girlfriend, who had assisted in aspects of the disposal. During interrogation and trial proceedings, evidence emerged about the television shows he had watched and how he attempted to apply techniques shown in those programs. The prosecution presented this as evidence of premeditation and calculation. In March 2024, Corey Martin was found guilty in federal court for the murder of Brandy Odom. He was sentenced in August 2024 to mandatory life in prison for murder for hire and wire fraud conspiracy. While Martin's crime involved exploiting someone vulnerable to his control, the next case would shatter a family's sense of security in their own home. Murder of the Krim siblings. On October 25, 2012, Marina Krim returned to her Upper West Side Manhattan apartment with her daughter after activities. She expected to find her two other children, Leo and Lucia, in the care of their nanny, Jocelyn Ortega. Instead, Marina discovered a scene of horror that would traumatize her permanently. Her children had been attacked, and Ortega had harmed herself in an apparent attempt to end her own life. How could someone entrusted with caring for children commit such acts? The apartment showed signs of violence. Marina found her children with fatal injuries, having been stabbed multiple times. Ortega was found in the bathroom, having inflicted wounds on herself with the same knives used in the attacks. Emergency responders arrived to a chaotic scene, attempting to save the children and stabilize Ortega. The Krim family had employed Ortega as a nanny for approximately 2 years. Jocelyn Ortega, born in 1962 in the Dominican Republic, had become a naturalized United States citizen and worked in childcare. She lived with her son, sister, and niece. To the Krims and others who knew her, she had seemed reliable and caring. Nothing in her outward behavior suggested she was capable of such acts. Investigation into motive revealed simmering resentment. Ortega harbored grievances about her pay and working hours. She felt underappreciated, despite the Krims believing they had a positive working relationship. The disconnect between her internal feelings and what she expressed outwardly meant the family had no warning of her deteriorating mental state. Ortega had been experiencing depression and anxiety, conditions she had hidden from the Krims. She had not sought mental health treatment and had not disclosed her struggles to her employers. Whether she would have acted if she had received help remains an unanswerable question. The combination of untreated mental illness and perceived grievances created a catastrophic situation. Jocelyn Ortega survived her self-inflicted wounds to her neck and throat. The legal proceedings stretched over years, with the trial beginning in 2018. Her defense team attempted to argue insanity, suggesting she had been experiencing a psychotic break and couldn't distinguish right from wrong during the acts. Psychiatric experts provided conflicting testimony about her mental state. Prosecutors contended that Ortega knew exactly what she was doing and acted out of anger and resentment. They pointed to her preparation of the scene and the timing of her actions as evidence of premeditation. The fact that she waited until Marina had left with one child, leaving her alone with two others, suggested planning rather than spontaneous breakdown. The jury rejected the insanity defense and convicted Ortega in April 2018. She received life imprisonment without possibility of parole at the Bedford Hills Correctional Facility. The sentence reflected the deliberate nature of targeting vulnerable children in her care. Ortega had been offered a plea deal of 30 years to life, but rejected it, choosing to proceed to trial. The Krim family faced unimaginable grief while participating in legal proceedings. Marina Krim has since become an advocate for early childhood education and mental health awareness. The family established foundations in memory of the children. from a nanny's resentment to a doctor's calculated cover-up in upstate New York. Leslie Newlander. On September 17, 2012, emergency services in DeWitt, New York, received a call reporting an accident. Robert Newlander, a prominent obstetrician-gynecologist, reported that his wife Leslie had slipped and fallen in their bathroom, hitting her head. Paramedics arrived to find Leslie Newlander deceased from severe head trauma. Initially, authorities accepted the explanation as a tragic accident. But an anonymous letter sent to the medical examiner would eventually unravel Robert's carefully constructed story. What really happened in that bathroom? Leslie Newlander, 61 years old, had been married to Robert for decades. They appeared to have a stable relationship and were respected members of the Syracuse area community. Robert's medical practice was successful, and they had raised children together. From outside appearances, there was no obvious motive for foul play. However, investigation revealed the marriage had been strained. Robert faced financial difficulties, and there was an impending divorce. These factors had been hidden from most people who knew the family. The facade of a happy marriage concealed underlying tensions that would prove fatal. Forensic examination of the scene raised immediate concerns. Blood spatter patterns on walls and the headboard of their bed contradicted the story of a bathroom fall. The injuries Leslie sustained were more consistent with blunt force trauma from being struck repeatedly than from a single fall. The forensic evidence suggested she had been attacked in the bedroom, not the bathroom. Initially classified as an accident, the case was reopened after an anonymous letter urged investigators to look more closely. The letter provided information suggesting Robert had motive and opportunity. This prompted a thorough re-examination of all evidence, including consulting additional forensic experts. Robert Newlander was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. Prosecution's case relied heavily on forensic analysis of blood patterns and medical testimony about the nature of Leslie's injuries. They portrayed Robert as someone who killed his wife to avoid divorce and financial consequences, then staged the scene to appear accidental. The first trial in 2015 resulted in conviction, but it was overturned on appeal due to juror misconduct. One juror had conducted outside research and shared information with other jurors that shouldn't have been considered during deliberations. The reversal required a complete retrial. Following his second trial in 2022, Robert Newlander was sentenced to 19 years to life. In 2024, the New York Court of Appeals, the state's highest court, upheld the conviction, exhausting his final state-level appeals. Robert maintains his innocence, but the forensic evidence and motive established during trials proved sufficient for conviction. He remained incarcerated as of 2026. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.